So this started happening in February of this year. I live in Finland, far away from any cities, a good 5 kilometers away from the nearest store and 900 meters away from the nearest house. I'm saying this because there should be no reason for someone to be around my house, especially at the middle of the night. I mean, it's normal for my family members to inform others if there's a car stood still on the road near a house for too long. We've had reports on Facebook of a suspicious car going around our small town and around another town near ours, driving slowly and stopping by at night. In the comments of the reports, people were saying that they had items stolen from their yards recently and stuff. So I had just been done with all my classes in high school and now only having to study for the finals. We get around a month off for studying vacation before the finals, and not sure if this is common in other countries. But instead of studying, I found myself playing video games or watching Netflix deep into the night pretty much every day. I keep my laptop on a table next to the window near my front yard where I can see the road. I always turn the lights off during the night so it wouldn't bother my family, and it made me more comfy knowing that people from the outside of the house couldn't see inside. One night though, I was watching a show and noticed a black van stopping on the road next to my house. It's really dark here during winter, but we've always had a very bright halogen light on the side of our barn, directed at the driveway. It turns on whenever a car drives close to it. There's a road that goes through our yard where we keep our cars. I thought it was a bit weird because the road technically is a part of our property. So I closed my laptop and looked at the car, but didn't see anyone come out. The driver was probably just texting or calling someone, so I turned on the lights and then I saw the car driving away. Maybe they noticed that it was not normal for a stranger to park next to a house at 2 a.m. and just left. There are a ton of bus stops to park at, which would be a safer place to stop for a phone call anyway. I didn't continue watching the show though because I had already closed my laptop and wanted to get back onto the normal sleep schedule anyway. For the next few nights, nothing out of the ordinary happened. A car or two went by our house every half an hour, and that was about it. I think it had been about 3 or 4 days since the first black van incident, before it happened again. I was playing a video game match when I noticed a car parked near my house once again, this time on the road that is not a part of our property. I see that it's the black van again, and I do what anyone would do at this moment and ask the people I was playing with over the internet for advice. They told me that maybe he's lost and I should just go and ask them what's up. So I listened to them and got my jacket, cap and flashlight and headed outside. As soon as they saw my flashlight, they took off in a flash. Once again, a night or two after this, I was on my laptop next to the window having a good time, and the car pulled over at freaking 2 a.m. I was pissed at this point because I've had things stolen from our yard before, and I knew that anybody who was up to no good would just park next to a house and have a phone call in the middle of the night multiple times a week. I wasn't going to just let them steal something or stalk our house, so I took my jacket, cap, flashlight, and a knife from the kitchen. I really didn't want to get into a fight if I caught someone stealing something, so a kitchen knife should scare anyone off, right? I walked outside, all lights turned off so they wouldn't notice me. I wanted to scare them so that they would never come here again, and I walked on the road with the knife hidden. I slowly closed into the headlights of the car and just stood in front of the car. I wanted to make sure that they were not just lost, so I gave them a chance to ask me for directions. I waited for maybe 15 seconds and I didn't see the driver in the dark. I had no idea why they wouldn't explain me their business or anything too, so I thought that maybe he was with someone who was looking for valuable items in my yard. And so I took the knife out in front of the headlights so the driver would get the message and leave. And leave he did. In fact, I've never seen a big van take off so fast. I then took my flashlight and tried to see the registration plate, but I couldn't manage to. During that night, I checked around the yard to see if anything was out of place, and being paranoid and a bit stunned at the thought that there could still be someone dangerous hiding around, I checked on the barn, which was closer than my actual house to the spot where the car was parked. and I saw that the barn door was open, so I searched it thoroughly. It took me a while since my dad owned a sawmill and the barn was packed with wood piles and farming stuff, and it was commonplace for me and my friends to play hide and seek in there, so I knew all the places to search for a potential hider. And I was relieved that nothing important was out of place and that nobody was inside. I locked the barn doors and went to sleep, and I told my dad the next day that he should check the barn door before going to bed and that some suspicious car was going around our area. I haven't seen the van anymore, and I like to think that I scared the same person who had stolen things around our town before. I don't know if I should have told the police about this, since I didn't see the registration plate of the vehicle or anything, and the only information I had about the car was that it was a black van. Soon, I'll be moving out far away to study, so I hope that no more items are stolen from my family, and I sure hope that this stalker guy just leaves my family alone. It was the middle of the afternoon on a bright and sunny day in an upper-middle-class residential neighbourhood in Australia, in which crime is virtually non-existent, peak suburbia. The neighbourhood was filled with retirees and rosy-cheeked couples with young kids, so I was basically the biggest degenerate this sterile place had to offer, being a dishevelled-looking, skateboarding, weed-smoking teenager. Anyway, it's about 3 p.m. and I'm sitting home alone in my room smoking some weed when I hear random rattling noises coming from downstairs. Instantly, I felt anxious and froze because my parents were out of state at this time, so I knew that it couldn't be them coming home. I slowly approached my bedroom door to hear better, and now I hear voices having a conversation downstairs. Maybe it was my uncle or cousins? I then distinctly remember hearing someone say something like, "Save some for me." Okay, shit. Now I definitely knew that something was seriously wrong. It seemed like they thought that no one was home, so I still had the element of surprise. I backed slowly into my room again and closed the door and called the police. I had barely been on the phone with them for 30 seconds when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Shit. The next few moments seemed like they happened in a blur of slow motion, but it also felt like it was over in seconds. I heard them ransack all over the rooms upstairs and then saw 2 masked intruders open my door and enter my room. First, they snatched my phone off of me and hung up on the cops. They started shouting at me to stay on the bed and to not move. They were 2 skinny males who only looked a couple of years older than me. One of them was brandishing a screwdriver to threaten me with and saying that he'd hurt me if I'd move. Then he started screaming at me, asking where the money was, where the drugs were, etc. Basically anything of value to these 2 junky low-life scumbags. They definitely looked tweaked out on meth, ice as we call it here, or some type of speedy amphetamine. Being high as hell on weed myself made everything seem so surreal too, like it wasn't really happening. It also kicked my anxiety into absolute overdrive, and it literally felt like there were alarms and sirens going off in my head. They also snatched my laptop and some other valuable-looking stuff and kept screaming at me not to move, stay on the bed, and asking where the money was. I basically told them that I didn't know anything and to just please leave me alone. They were so methed out, though, that I don't even know if they heard me. They just kept screaming for money and drugs. After they ransacked all my drawers and were satisfied they'd taken anything of value, they just swiftly went down the stairs and ran straight out of the house. I was still sort of in shock and disbelief, but I heard an engine rev and looked outside of my window to see a white Mercedes, which was later revealed to be stolen from a house down the street just minutes before they hit my house, and they speed off up the street. I sort of slowly walked around my house in a state of stoned what the hell just happened, looking at the damage they'd done and the mess they'd left. The house was absolutely torn apart, and I then quickly got my shit together and grabbed the landline to call my parents out of state and let them know what the hell just happened. They obviously made sure I was okay and told me to call the police right now, so I did. They showed up not long after and started questioning me, and taking statements, etc., and thankfully ignored the reek of weed smoke in my room. The last thing I needed was getting arrested for possession after my house was just broken into. The cop was actually a good guy. Anyway, the idiot with the screwdriver had dropped it on the floor of my room while snatching all my stuff, and they were able to get fingerprints off of that, and they eventually both ended up in jail like they should. There's also a few other notable parts to this story that highlight just how screwed up these junkies were. Firstly, at the first house they hit, they ran into the family dog attacking them, and there's CCTV footage of them stabbing the dog in the eye, blinding him. Secondly, at my house, they grabbed a bunch of gold medals from my dad's high school athletics days that looked expensive but weren't actually worth anything except extreme sentimental value to my dad. So, screw them for stealing my dad's nostalgic high school achievements to try and sell for a cheap high. And lastly, after my house, while they were driving up the street, they literally snatched a bag from an old lady on the sidewalk before pissing off for good. I just wanted to make those last points to highlight just how worthless and scummy these pathetic pieces of shit are. I have a news article verifying this story as well if anyone would like to see it. So, rot in jail and piss off, you meth-crazed burglars from 4 years ago. To begin, when I was a child, my mother had undiagnosed bipolar and is probably narcissistic too. She has always been self-centered and will go through bouts of straight-up mania, depression and apathy where she neglected me to a point as well. Especially when she spent a whole week just laying in bed accusing me of hating her and guilting me for no reason at all. Anyway, where I lived as a child was very remote. We had limited stock in the shops, yet we had this guy come down with a truck of fruit and vegetables once a week. Everyone just referred to the driver as the fruit man. He would park at 3 points in town for an hour at each stop for people to come buy stuff. The last stop was always at the end of our street at roughly 4 in the afternoon. My mother was obsessed with tomatoes, but lazy as hell, so she made me walk down and buy the tomatoes every week. I think I did this roughly for 3 years between the ages of 6 and 9. When I was about 8 years old, the weird guy down the end of my street started talking to me when I was going to the fruit truck. And as a child, I felt obliged to talk to this guy because of the respect your elders kind of stuff. I found him annoying, even as a kid. He acted as if we were friends because I stopped and pretended to be interested in his bullshit. At the same time, a lot of dogs were going missing in our street too, while a lot of the fence dogs would go berserk whenever this guy would go down the street. People assumed the pound keeper was driving down and picking up the roaming dogs. This was also way before microchipping and desexing was compulsory. With the guy, I tried walking on the other side of the street to avoid him, but he would run out, follow me, and basically force me to speak to him every time. He also started waiting for me on those days by his gate. I told my mother about this, but she didn't care. Basically, her response was, "Where are the tomatoes?" So, over a course of weeks, I was hassled by this man when trying to buy tomatoes. One day, the man asked me what I was doing, as if he didn't know, right? I told him I was buying tomatoes, and he paused and then got really excited. Even at this age, I knew it was strange, but the guy said that he had some free tomatoes if I wanted them, and I agreed. But then, he asked me to come in. I assumed he just meant the front gate, so I walked into the yard, but he started beckoning me to go inside of his house. And that was a no for me. I can remember his creepy smile and the spring in his step when he was walking to the front door trying to get me to follow him inside. When he realized that I wasn't willingly going to walk in, he took me by the hand and started pulling me towards the door. From that point, everything basically went into slow-mo while my senses seemed to heighten. Even though in reality it was less than a minute, it played out like a movie scene. I could see this man grinning at me while pulling me towards the door. I could smell this putrid smell like rotting meat, and I saw a potato sack on the ground with something dead or dying in it. Most likely one of those missing dogs, I suppose. And when the guy started opening the door, time sped up again. I snatched my hand out of his hand and just ran to the end of the street. I didn't think of which way to run, but I just went towards the fruit truck, and while I was running, the guy called me everything under the sun. When I got to the fruit truck, I wasn't crying, but I was sulking. The fruit man, who was foreign, either German or Russian or something similar, said, "You no talk to that man." I also bought the stupid tomatoes and had to go a really long way home through a neighbour's yard and dirt tracks. When I got home, my mother didn't even care that it took me over an hour to get home. I also told her what happened, and her response was, "You should have got the free tomatoes," as if I was a dick for not going inside. But because she didn't have a bad reaction to it, I, at the time, being young and all, assumed it was normal, until years later where I realized that I probably would have been abused or even murdered for tomatoes if I went in. The only positive thing that occurred from this was the man stopped waiting for me when I went to buy tomatoes. And I guess that was just about the only blessing for me in my young childhood years. A year ago, I was in a different place in my life. I was a senior in high school and had some stuff going on in my life which limited the number of relationships, family, friends, and love that I had. My life at home, it wasn't the greatest. I didn't have many friends and I had anxiety and depression. This time last year, I was craving attention. I wanted someone to love me and show that they loved me, and I thought that if I was the object of someone's interest 24/7, then I would be the happiest person on earth. Don't blame me. I was 17 and starved of love my whole life. But I now realize that this is not what I want. Around 11 months ago, give or take, my best friend at the time and I were walking all over town. I lived in a small town, a literal village, and we were walking on our way to the bakery. When we reached the bakery, there was a guy on a motorbike with his helmet on adjusting his gloves outside. I'm a huge fan of motorbikes, and since this guy was on a nice-looking cruiser, I couldn't help but look. It wasn't a long stare, just a short glance, and we entered and ordered our food and ate. 1 hour later, we decided to leave, and Mr. Cruiser was still outside, this time crouching down next to his motorbike. It looked like he was checking his tire, and we walked past, and that was the end of that. We decided to go for a long walk around town and to the local walking track, and I was walking on the side nearest to the road and my friend was nearest to the shops. As my friend was busy telling me a story about her latest shopping trip, I couldn't help but notice that the same cruiser guy drove past us. The sun was shining on his motorbike, and the way it reflected, I thought he looked cool, so again I glanced. This time, he glanced back, and although I couldn't see his face, he was wearing a biker helmet, the kind that covers the face. He turned his head, and I could tell that he was looking at me too. Our walk continues, and then he drives past us again, but in the opposite direction. I think nothing of it, and we continue walking, and he drives past us again. My friend, mid-conversation, doesn't notice though. We continue walking, and he drives past us again, and again, and we turn into a small street, and he turns there too. The whole time he drives past, he looks at me, but the last time he drives past, I can see his helmet look me up and down. At this point, we were weirded beyond belief, but we just continued walking, and eventually, we don't see him again. A couple of days later, I forgot the whole incident and was walking home from school. My house was kind of far away, so my walk was pretty long, and since no one from my school lived close to my house, it was always done alone. As I was walking, I realized that there was this one green car that had continually been passing me ever since I left school. What was weirder was the fact that the driver kept staring at me with the biggest eyes I've ever seen. As I reached my home, I saw the car pull up and park on the opposite side of the street, but no one got out. I thought it might have been the neighbors and just forgot all about it, but the next morning as I began my walk to school, there was that same green car again, with all its lights turned on and the same guy in it staring at me. I ignored it and walked by. Again, it began to drive past me continuously, and it was at this time that I thought that something was up and called my parents to pick me up after school. The next day, I was sitting in my room. My room faces the street, at my desk. My desk is in front of the window so I can see out of it, when I noticed the green car come and park in front of my house, in front of my window. No one gets out of the car, and I don't think about it and continue with my homework, but when I finish my homework, the car is gone. Again, I think that this must just all be a coincidence or something. But this goes on for 2 weeks. Every day my mum would leave the house for work at around 4, the same green car would come and park in front of the house and no one would get out. Sometimes the lights would be on. The way the person would park, I couldn't see who it was in the car or the registration, but it was definitely the same car as the one that would pass me. Eventually, I see this car every time I leave the house, in fact. If I'm leaving school, at a friend's, going to the supermarket, it's everywhere and I think I'm going crazy. One day, I began dating this guy and we'd go for dates at the local fast food restaurant and then go to the library to finish our homework and stuff. The first time we went on this date, my guy walked in looking furious, made eye contact with my then boyfriend and walked out. And I immediately recognized him by the cap that he was wearing. It was Mr. Green Car. I regret not telling my boyfriend then and there, but I was nervous and I didn't know what I was doing. Over the coming weeks, every time we'd go to the library, this guy would storm in and sit directly next to us with a newspaper in his hand and make furious eye contact with my boyfriend. One time, the newspapers were next to us and he actually leaned over my boyfriend, and when my boyfriend gave him the newspaper, he almost snatched it straight from his hand. This guy would be there every single time that we went to the library too. Eventually, we broke up, but that didn't stop me from going to the library or this cap guy too. This time, he was way friendlier too. He would go to the computers next to me and start laughing at stuff that he was scrolling through. He would even stay late with me and only leave when I would leave. I found this guy really weird and he was middle-aged. But what really set all of this off was one day, my parents left the house for the night and I woke up at 3 a.m. to someone knocking on my window. At first, I thought it was a dream and went back to bed, but the knocking became way more aggressive, so I called my neighbor. She came to inspect it and found nothing. But the next morning, the green car guy was waiting for me in front of my house, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel in impatience. As I was leaving school, I saw the cruiser with the helmet guy parked outside. The whole walk back home, he would drive past me and rev up his engine. By the time I got home, he stopped, parked in front of my house, revved his engine one last time and sped off. At this point, I started bawling and told my parents, and they told me to stop overreacting. So I tried to ignore everything, and this continued for 3 months. Every Thursday, the cruiser guy would begin to do this and rev up his engine. Sometimes I would be awakened at nights when my parents weren't home to the sound of revving outside my house at 3 a.m. Eventually, I moved college to a city about 3 hours away by car. I forget all about him, and I spent months there and I didn't see him, and I was so much happier. I returned home for the mid-semester break though, and the night that I arrived, I heard the familiar knocking, tapping on my window at 3 o'clock in the morning. I told my dad, and again he checked and told me to just go back to sleep. I spent the rest of the week with the green car in front of my room, and every time I closed the curtains and reopened them, the car would be gone. And so, I began closing my curtains and staying in the dark, which depressed me even further. I was really glad when I finally got back to uni. One day, I was checking my Facebook after I got back. I recently changed my profile picture and it was on public. I know, I'm an idiot. and realized that someone had shared my picture. When I went to see who it was, it told me that their settings were private, and all I knew was that they were definitely not my friends. The next day, I was leaving my lab at around 6 p.m. by myself, and I saw the green car again, with the cap guy in it, parked outside. Thoroughly shook, I rushed back to my dorm, and every Thursday, I would see the same damn green car every time I left my lab with the guy in it and the lights running. Last week, I left my lab and saw the same cruiser again. I knew it was the same one, as it had a distinct logo or sign in blue on its side, and it was parked outside the lab with a motorbike guy with the helmet on it. He revved up his engine and followed me for a bit, revving his engine, and then drove away angrily. Like I said, I'm really shook and I have no idea what to do. I don't know who this guy is or what he wants, and I'm scared that no one's going to believe me. Should I confront him? Any advice would be great. Is this all in my head? Oh, also, I forgot to mention that sometimes he's not alone in the green car. There's an overweight, also middle-aged, balding guy with glasses, or sometimes there's another guy who also wears a baseball cap, and I didn't see these two people up close, only from the car, but I know that they're there. And today, on my way to shopping, the same green car passed me, and again, he was looking at me. But this time, he looked completely and thoroughly angry. I was at an intersection and waiting for the pedestrian light to turn green when he drove off, really angrily, and in the middle of the street, which is busy, mind you, he performed a U-turn and passed me again with the same angry look. This whole thing has got me really paranoid, and I'm wondering if there's a way that he could know the stuff I post from my computer and phone. I mean, why else would he be so angry? I don't really know where to begin, but I suppose it started before I was born. My birth set in motion a series of actions that led to the threat of my life beyond my control. So, pre my existence, my mother Jane dated an older guy called James when she was in her mid-teens. He adored her, but wasn't of the same religion as her, so she ended up marrying a gentleman from her congregation instead, leaving James rather put out. A year after being married, Jane birthed me and decided that she was unhappy with my father, Dave, and contacted James with intent to go back to him. So Jane packed a bag one night, took me, and left. As soon as she arrived at James's house, she was bombarded with messages from Dave, telling her that he would take full custody of me if she didn't return. So, with a heavy heart, she chose me over James. And therein lies my problem. She went back to my father, and after another year of failed attempts, they divorced and my mother moved south to be with family, completely forgetting about James, mind you. My childhood, well, it was fairly normal for the next 13 years. A few house moves, a new stepdad, and a few siblings. Mother's second marriage falls through and she's single again. The year is 2010 and she's just discovered Facebook. Being newly single and having sudden contact with all of her old school friends, she quickly strikes up a few romances out of nostalgia. Nothing sticks though, until she finds him. James has a Facebook account. Not very active and no profile picture, but Mum is sure it's him and immediately falls in love again. He comes down south and meets us kids and stays for my 16th birthday party. He looks wise. He's easily in his 50s with shaved grey hair, balding on top, glasses, and a really creepy-ass grin if you ask me. So far, not too bad, I guess. So, why am I posting this here? How does this involve me and not wanting to meet this guy again? Well, when my mum leaves him a third time, he finally flips and the crazy comes out to play. He starts turning up at the house uninvited. He's told to leave every time, and the visits become less frequent, and we think maybe he's got the message. But then, hand-delivered letters start arriving for my mum, and it's the contents of these letters that causes me alarm. In them, he details how if she had never met my father, they could have been happy together, and he had a plan to get her back that was ruined by the untimely arrival of me. So he did what any crazy man would do and started plotting to get me out of the picture. After all, I am the reason she went back to Dave, wasn't I? Back in 1995, she had a near miss of a car accident, with baby me in the car, when a car clipped her at a junction. She didn't get the car's details, but put it down to chance. In the letters, James tells her that the incident 15 years ago, it was him, and that he won't miss this time. He informs her that he still believes that there's a chance for them, but only with me out of the picture. I'm not a baby anymore, and my father is well and truly out of the picture, but the crazy in James's brain won't let it go. The next letter informs my mother that he's told social services that she's drunk and that they'll come and take me away. That's not hard to prove that that one was false, so we don't panic. The next letter tells her that he's going to burn down the house. If he can't have her, no one else will. This one she takes to the police. Upon investigation, it's revealed that an ex of James, with the same first name as my mother, mind you, has a restraining order against him for stalking and attempted arson. We're put on high alert and the process for a restraining order is begun. A few nights later, Mum hears someone outside the house too. Thinking it's him, she calls the police immediately and they arrive within 5 minutes and search the street. There's no James, but his car is found behind the resident garages. He doesn't return to it that night. The next day, the police contact a woman's hostel in a neighbouring county. They have a room spare, so we pack our bags and head there. And so, that summer of my life was spent in hiding. No friends, no social media, nothing. Well, I wasn't supposed to have social media, but they're using proxy servers on the computer in the teens' rec room. I was the only teen in the hotel at this point. It was easy enough to get onto. And possibly very stupid too. Because James began messaging me through my Facebook, playing nice, telling me that he loved my mum and needed to know that she was okay. I ignored him and blocked his account, and I had a number of fake accounts try to befriend me and they were all blocked also. After 3 months, they find us a new house and we have a week to go back and pack up our old lives. So that's what we do. And now, it's 8 years later and I've moved several times since, including for uni, and honestly, haven't given much thought to the man who wanted to kill me so that he could be with my mother. 2 years ago, I moved back up north not far from my birthplace. And 2 weeks ago, I received an old email account for a rental agreement. At first, I thought it was spam, but upon opening it, the name at the top read James Smith, and the rental address, it was not too far from me, only a town away in fact. In other words, that sick fuck gave my email to the renters as his so that I would know that he was nearby. I haven't heard anything else since then, but I seriously hope that James and we never meet again.